Today's Shipchat is a request by Commander Tully DT. If you have a video request, then consider joining at the Commander tier. Thank you very much. Right, so today by request we're going to be talking about the Damar class. Now, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not exactly the best expert when it comes to Star Trek Online. I'm not 100% familiar with the lore in the universe and the story and how it develops, so you'll have to give me some leeway here. It obviously is a design by Cryptic and used in Star Trek Online. There was actually another Damar class, it's on screen right now. As you can see, it's a very different kind of ship, much more smaller and compact and much more, it's more like a Cardassian Defiant, whereas of course the Damar in Star Trek Online is a Dreadnought, so they're, opposite ends of the scale. I kind of feel like they're at different periods, which I will get into, because the Damar is meant to be early 25th century, but that's still a long time after the Dominion War, whereas I get the feeling that this other Damar was an immediate post-war design. It was designed by Mauricio Tejerenas, and you have a bit of the influence from the escort and flight cruiser. Sort of those two ships are merged together in this, and then there you can see it also introduces, quite unusually for most of the Cardassian ships in Star Trek Online, a more curved shape. Most of the Cardassian ships in Star Trek Online are very polygonal and rectangular and geometric. This is much more curved and elegant. It's very Art Deco, in fact. If I had to take a guess, I would say that a lot of the aesthetic for the design of the Damar goes back to Deep Space Nine, the station itself, which is a very Art Deco station. You have a lot of mixture of curves with sharp geometric shapes, very Art Deco sort of look. So I think that's perhaps where it comes from. So it's a nice sort of visual continuity there. There's other bits of visual continuity which I'll get onto, because I think there's a lot of information sort of buried in the design. But in any case, in universe, it's a 25th century design, so really what this is first and foremost demonstrative of is the Cardassian post-war recovery. Now, this didn't happen overnight. If you look at the 2380s, Cardassia is very reliant on either older upgraded models of Galor and Hideki, or newer sort of derivatives of those designs, but they're very much in the vein of cutters, corvettes and monitors, very small defensive vessels. They don't really have much of a expeditionary or exploratory element to their fleet in that period. But as the 24th century wears on, and as Cardassia begins to liberalise, you can start to see impressive growth and recovery from where they were just a few decades before. Now, what I should also note is that it does differ from previous designs. First and foremost, in how it was actually developed. You see, previously, starship design was left purely to the military, and it was done by people in the military and so on and so forth. It was very much a military-driven process, even when the military and Detapa Council were sharing power. But this isn't the case for the Damar. The Damar was designed under a requirement issued by the civilian government. And so because of that, you actually have a very different approach in the design, and you can see it. It's far less austere and blunt compared to a lot of previous Cardassian ships. This one is much more aesthetically pleasing, more elegant. It's designed to be a statement of what the new Cardassia is, and you've got a little bit of old in there, but there are also definitely bits of new, and they're brought together very harmoniously in the Damar. I think that's the thing that really comes across. It fuses those two design philosophies together to create something that is evocative of both old Cardassia and new Cardassia. But I'll first get on to the pedigree. So when I say symbolic of reminiscent of old Cardassia, one of the things I cannot ignore is the almost tri-wing profile of it. You can see that the Damar is kind of segmented into three sections I would almost hazard a guess that they could separate, perhaps not, but you have 3 distinct tiers to the Damar, and that is unmistakably akin to the Houtet, which had a tri-wing design, and obviously it's much more fluid and sleek compared to the Houtet, which was large and bulky and very, not very elegant. More elegant in its own way, but not very elegant compared to the Damar. And I think really what you see here is worth bearing, and I think what's really worth bearing in mind here is that the Damar has more in common with the Houtet than it does the Galor. Drawing a line from the Galor to the Damar is not actually that helpful, but drawing a line from the Houtet to the Damar, and you can really see those kind of developments taking shape. Again, you've got this overall sleeker, slimmer design, more efficient design, and you can also see the aesthetic changes as well. But that DNA, that fundamental DNA, is still there. It also has a uncanny resemblance, a suspicious resemblance, to the Sonar battlecruiser. Now, this is entering into the realms of theory crafting, but my guess is that they're built partially by the same people, and not that the Sonar built the Damar. In fact, I suspect that the Cardassians built the Sonar battlecruisers, because the Cardassians had the infrastructure to do so. You can see certain commonalities in the design and mechanics of it. You can see there's a lot of commonalities in the design and in the aesthetic. And it then makes sense for the Sonar battlecruiser, because they needed to protect the Ketracel white supplies, and we'll build you cruisers for them, but you can buy them, so it's legal, because they're clearly... So what you really see is those Sonar cruisers probably weren't built by the Cardassian military, they were built by civilian contractors, and then you can see that civilian talent has now moved over and integrated into the military, so that you have something that resembles a little bit of both. And then thirdly, you've got ancient Cardassian architecture, which it very strongly resembles. Previously, Cardassian ships have always been devoted to function first, and you can really see it in the Talarian War. In the ships of the Talarian War, these are bulky, ugly ships, but by this time you can see a real fusion between function and form. In that way, it actually makes it... You can actually see that the Cardassians are moving much more culturally, kind of moving in a similar direction to how the Romulans were. For the Romulans, a ship was an artistic statement. As much as it was an actual utility, it was also an artistic statement that you would be flying around and showing off. And this is much the same, I think, with the Damar. It is making a very clear statement and communicating that very much through its aesthetic and its design philosophy. Now that brings us to capabilities. Now, identified as a Science and Intel Dreadnought, whatever that means, a Dreadnought is a Dreadnought, but I suppose it's just not a blunt power Dreadnought. It's a fairly well-balanced design. It doesn't put too much stock in firepower or armour, which some Dreadnoughts can do. It seems to have a good balance of speed, agility, and firepower. This is very much illustrative of a different Cardassia, a Cardassia that now knows that it needs to fight smart. It includes cloaking systems and a warp field dispersal, and it also has numerous advanced sensor systems. The key thing with fighting smart, and the reason that the Cardassians have moved in this direction, well, one, they're no longer a authoritarian society, so it's not just whatever the boss says you have to do. There is a little bit more openness and criticism, but also because of manpower concerns. While Cardassia has in many ways rebounded from the Dominion War very well, long term one of the things that is going to hurt them is the loss of manpower and population, and this is something that they can't heal from overnight. And so because of that, advanced computer systems and these advanced sensors, a lot of these systems are focused on not only minimizing the amount of manpower required to operate the ship, but it's also focused on minimizing threat and minimizing risk. You see, previously, Cardassian doctrine would basically entail going headlong into a problem, and if your ships got destroyed, they got destroyed, but you'd then come away with it knowing what to do differently, and then when you went again, you'd win. That was the kind of approach that they took through all of the different wars that they fought with the Talarians and the Tentheki and the Federation. And they could get away with it because they had the manpower to do so, and they could replace the losses with newer ships built to fight the new enemy. But they can't do this now. So instead, they put far more emphasis on knowing the enemy before they even engage them. And that is really the essential key to what the Damar does, is that it helps identify and understand an enemy or an ally, and identify strengths and weaknesses prior to ever even joining battle or even ever being seen. In this way, the Damar is not so much a frontline combat ship, though it is very much capable as a frontline combat ship. It's got a very good balance of speed, weapons and firepower. It can certainly handle itself, and it doesn't need too much support or protection because it's reasonably maneuverable. It's not going to get overwhelmed by lots of small ships. It also, as a dreadnought, carries its own complement of fighters, so that helps as well. It has a very good well-rounded capability, but its primary mission is to serve as the nervous center of a Cardassian battle group and in long-range fire support. And that is really, there is still, of course, you can still see in that the strong Cardassian preference for ranged engagement. It has, as I say, concise armament. It's not modest because it's quite powerful, but it is concise. At the front you have 4 weapon mounts, and at the back you have 3, and this can be of any kind of weapons that are available, though of course normally it will be the modern model of spiral wave disruptors or even polaron beams perhaps, as well as torpedo launchers. For a dreadnought, the Damar is very agile and very handy, and like I say, perfectly capable of looking after itself. It very heavily contrasts with the Houtet, which was very much designed to be fighting as part of a fleet. This, as a sign of sort of modern times, can go off and do things on its own and not worry about it. In that way, you can see it actually takes a little bit of inspiration also from the Sovereign class, which, yes, is a battleship or battle cruiser, but what the Sovereign did very well was maintain an ability to operate independently without the need for support. And this is something that in the 25th century a lot of different races have copied, because it's a very useful thing to have your best and brightest on the front line as things are developing. Yes, you want to protect them, but you also don't want them so far back that they are useless and that they can't really make effect on any kind of situation that develops. So to conclude, outwardly, the Damar is a very new design, but really underpinning it and its design philosophy, it has a lot in common with its ancestors, and it is symbolic of Cardassia not just today, but across all ages, and represents a acknowledgement and an acceptance of all of Cardassian history, both the good and the bad. That is really the statement that the Damar class makes. It accepts its history and goes forward into the future.